Good morning, fifth graders. Today we are going to be learning about haiku. Now that we're done with our Japan unit, we get to have some fun with haiku. So our learning targets for today are that we will be able to understand the origins of haiku, why do people write haiku, and where do they come from, and to read and critique examples of haiku. So for today, we're just going to be reading several examples of haiku and thinking about them and doing a little bit of writing about those haiku. Before we get into learning about haiku, I just want to do a little bit of review that will be very important when we're writing our haiku. So, what is a syllable? This might be review for some of you, but a syllable is a single unbroken sound of a spoken word. What does that mean? Syllables can be thought of as the beats of spoken language. Okay, that's starting to make more sense. The beats of spoken language. So let's look at an example here and we'll talk about what is going on with the syllables. So if we think of syllables as the beats of a word, let's look at this first word, delightful. So delightful. And I think the easiest way to figure out how many syllables a word has is to just clap out the sounds. So delightful. Okay. How many times did I clap? Delightful. 3. So delightful has 3 syllables. It can be broken up into 3 syllables. Delightful display. So display, or display has 2 syllables, right? Display. Delightful 3, display 2. So altogether 5, and that's important in a haiku. Then we look to this next line here. Snowdrops bow their pure white heads. How many syllables does that line have? You can pause your video and figure it out. How many syllables does the second line have? Snowdrops bow their pure white heads. Hopefully you came up with 7. There are 7 syllables there. So we had 5 in the first line, 7 in the second, and then this last line, to the sun's glory. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. That's going to be important when we're writing haiku, 5, 7, 5. One more example here, and this one is just to give you an example of when the whole syllable thing can get a little bit tricky. So the first example, or the first line here is a mountain village. A mountain village. A mountain village. 5 syllables, right? And then here's where it starts to get a little tricky. Under the piled up snow. Under the piled up snow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But I thought the second line had to have 7 syllables. I thought we just said that. So this word piled is a little bit strange, and that's because the English language is a little bit strange. And we could say piled 2 different ways. Sometimes we could say piled, right? Piled. That would give us 2 syllables. Or we could just say piled, 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 piled. So depending on how you say this word, you either have 7 syllables in the second line or you have 6. I'm going to say piled so that we can have 7 syllables in the second line here. And then last, the sound of water, 5 syllables. Okay, now that we have a kind of working idea of what syllables are, let's take a look at what haiku is. And we learned a little bit about this in our reader, and hopefully you remember a little bit about it, but this will give us some review, and some of this stuff did pop up in our reader. Let's see if I can make this full screen. There we go. So what is haiku? And you can follow along with me as I read this out loud. Haiku is a form of poetry, first made popular in Japan, which has become appreciated around the world. Haiku poets are challenged to convey a vivid message in only 17 syllables. like we just talked about. 5, 7, 5. That equals 17. 5 plus 7 plus 5. One of the greatest haiku poets was the samurai Basho. Remember him from our reader? Basho's father was also a samurai from the Iga province. To become a samurai, Basho served a local lord who was fond of writing. Basho learned the style of writing haiku and wrote under the name Sobo. During the years, Basho traveled throughout Japan writing and further developing the haiku style. He died in Osaka, Japan in 1694 and continued to write haiku up until his death. A sample of Basho's haiku style. Spring morning marvel, lovely nameless little hill on a sea of mist. So here I want you to pause your video and see if that meets our requirements for 5 syllables in the first line, 7 syllables in the second, and 5 in the third. So pause your video. Is it 575? Okay, reading on. In Japan, these poems are valued for their simplicity, their openness, their depth, and lightness. So the rules of a haiku. In our Where I'm From poems that we wrote, there really were no rules, right? I said that you could basically write it however you wanted as long as you use stanzas. But in a haiku, there are some strict rules. So a haiku, or at least the kind of haiku that we're going to be writing, they use exactly 17 syllables. So your poem only has 17 syllables total. The syllables are arranged in 3 lines of 5, 7, and 5. So if we look up here, this first line has 5 syllables, second line has 7 syllables, and the third line has 5 syllables. Haiku avoids similes and metaphors. So unlike our Where I'm From poem, these haiku are going to be so simple and they're going to avoid similes and metaphors. Lastly, your haiku should refer to a season of the year. Most haiku refer to a season of the year. Okay, what is a haiku about? Haiku poems can describe anything, but are seldom complicated or hard to understand. So usually they're very easy to understand. Almost all haiku has a dominant impression or main idea that appeals strongly to one of the 5 senses. So that is similar to our Where I'm From poem, right? Our haiku are going to appeal or utilize one of the 5 senses really strongly. This last bit here is important, the seasonal theme. Each haiku must contain a kigo, a season word, which indicates what season of the year the haiku is set. For example, blossoms would indicate spring, so we think about flowers in the springtime. Snow would give the idea of winter. Mosquitoes would imply summertime. Boy, is that right. The seasonal words, typo, aren't always that obvious. You might need to consider the theme of the poem to find it. For example, let's look at this haiku here. Clouds appear and bring to men a chance to rest from looking at the moon. So, this one is a little bit tricky. What is the kigo? What is the season word? What season is this poet describing? It says the seasonal word in this haiku is clouds, indicating the rainy season. So the kigo, the seasonal word, is not always going to be that obvious. Okay, so now that we have an idea of what haiku is, I'm going to open up this haiku examples Google Doc, and this is attached on your assignment. And I'm also going to open up the haiku reflection Google document. This is also included on your assignment, and this is going to be the document that you end up writing on. So first I'm going to start out by putting a heading. Oops. Wow, it's already the 11th of June, and my subject can be haiku. So the instructions here are to read through the examples of haiku on the Haiku Examples Google Doc. Then, choose 2 haiku to respond to in the tables below. So it looks like we're going to be writing the number of the poem. Each of our poems is numbered. And then we're going to be thinking about what feelings did you have from the poem? Which of your 5 senses did the poem appeal to most? What mood was the author trying to convey? And what was the kigo, the seasonal word? Remember, some are harder to find than others. And we're going to be doing this with 2 separate poems. So let's take a look at our haiku examples. So the first one is poem number 1. I'm going to respond to poem number 1. So I'm going to include that right here. Poem number 1. A giant firefly. And again, firefly could be 2 syllables, or it could be firefly, right? A giant firefly. That way, this way, that way, this. And it passes by. Wow. So this is really just conveying one very particular moment, right? You can almost imagine just sitting there as this giant firefly is kind of zigging and zagging its way past you, and then boom, it's gone. So this is just describing one moment. So I'm going to go back to my reflection. What feelings did you have from the poem? And I'm going to say this poem reminded me of the first time I ever saw a firefly as a kid on the East Coast. And it brought me back to that same warm, humid evening in Delaware. Okay. Which of your 5 senses did the poem appeal to most? So remember, our senses, let's see if I can get this time, are sight, sound, touch, taste. Sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. So what's going on here? Are we seeing? I'm going to say sight for this one because it's not really describing a smell or a taste or a sound. So I'm just going to write sight. And then what mood was the author trying to convey here? Well, there are so few words in these haiku that sometimes it's difficult to tell what exactly the mood is. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of inferring, a little bit of stretching. And I'm going to say that the mood here, the author is trying to convey the laziness of a summer evening. Because when I read this and I think about this firefly, I just imagine somebody sitting there, maybe on their porch, just watching the evening, and a giant firefly just going this way, then that way, and this way, and then it's gone, and then the evening continues. So I'm going to say that he's trying to convey the laziness of a summer evening. And here I should have restated the question and the answer. The poet appeals most to sight. Or not the poet, the poem. Okay, lastly, what was the kigo, the seasonal word? So I'm looking here, reading the poem. What is the tip to me? What clue do I have about what season this is about? And this, you may or may not know this, but fireflies hibernate through the winter in their larval stage, and then they come back out in the spring. So this could either be about spring or summer, but fireflies really make me think about summer. So I'm going to say fireflies show that the season is either spring or summer. Okay. And then I would go through this process again with a second haiku. So you're reading through these examples of haiku, which really shouldn't take too long. And the great thing about reading these is that as you read them, you start to internalize, you start to feel that 5-syllable, 7-syllable, 5-syllable rhythm. And that will make it so much easier to write haiku tomorrow if we can kind of get that rhythm inside of us. So you're reading through the haiku and then choose two to respond to on your haiku reflection Google document. In the next lesson, we will brainstorm and write our own haiku. Awesome. If you have any questions about this, send me an email and have a great day.